But we've now got this huge revolution happening with obesity management with GLP-1 inhibitors, which the Ozempics and the Wegovys, these weight loss jabs that I'm sure you've been hearing about in the press. There's a lot of interest, certainly in the longevity space, to see them. I don't necessarily agree with this, by the way. I think we need to attack the root causes of obesity, which is where I stand on.
Yeah.
But there is nevertheless a lot of interest in the longevity community for the quote unquote longevity benefits of this weight loss drugs, because if you lose a lot of weight, you tend to then get fewer of these chronic diseases, which of course will enable you to live a healthier, happier life. I think in many ways, for the people who really need them, so let's just focus on that, for the people who really need them, which are very heavily obese people, like BMI plus 31 or something, I think it is, body mass index. So you have to be very heavily obese. So for example—
they can't go walking.
Sorry?
So they can't do any exercise.
So it's very difficult for them to— it's much more difficult for them to exercise because they've, let alone metabolically, but also the weight on their joints, and they probably have back problems. They're beset by problems associated with their obesity. And also it's often linked with depression. It's all, and then of course, behavioral, the motivation to do something, then it gets affected. So it's a very complex problem.
Yeah.
And listen, I can understand how difficult it must be for a person who gets into that situation. And there are some genetic and metabolic reasons why people tend to be more likely to get to that point. So let's not forget that either. So I think we have to be very careful, again, about making judgments of people who reach that position in their life when they're very heavily obese. So they do need help. And I think this is where the GLP-1 inhibitors are a godsend, a lifeline for them, because and that was always how they were intended to be used. So for example, in the NHS, there are not that many people who are eligible for this because of the very specific requirements. The problem that we've got is that they're available on the black market and also in the private health setting, where people who are better resourced, who may not even be that heavy, are using these drugs. And that's where some of the problems that we're seeing now, because there are potential side effects. There's muscle wasting, for example. You lose a lot of muscle along with that, which isn't good, especially if you're older.
From these drugs?
Of course, yes.
Well, why is that then? How do they work?
It's just— it's to do with the way that internally, metabolically, and at a cellular level, these things are happening.
Don't be afraid to get scientific here, by the way, because if I don't understand, I'll ask.
There's lots of information about there on a very specific scientific level, which gives you— so I think that the point is, like any drug, there are going to be side effects and adverse events, and especially as there's more usage of the drug, and especially for people who may not necessarily be the ones who should be using them, you're going to see more side effects. So that's one of the obvious ones, and that is not necessarily a good thing, right?
Early days.
Especially if you're older, because of course one of the big things that you have to worry about getting older is loss of muscle mass. In fact, it's becoming really increasingly recognized. It's the scientific word sarcopenia, muscle wasting, muscle mass loss, because you need muscle around your bones to keep you upright, to keep your whole musculoskeletal sort of system in gear. Also helps against osteoporosis, which is the bone mineral density problem. So I think there are all sorts of reasons why the muscle wasting is not a good thing. But you have, again, it's all things. You have to weigh up the pros and cons of any drug against the side effects and against the adverse events. So this is where you need the discipline, and you do need— and this is where it's a good thing that we have the regulation that we do around drugs, because we need that to have the rail guards against that. So I think my worry about this is that it is being used by a lot of people who probably shouldn't be using them. And of course, the other thing too is the whole behavioral side is that it is very difficult to basically stay off these drugs from a behavioral standpoint, because going back to the root cause, a lot of these people, once they come off the drugs, they find that they put the weight back on. So then you need to be on these drugs for life. And that is not necessarily a good thing. It's great for drug companies because they make a lot of money that way, but it is not necessarily good, for a healthcare system, especially if people are getting this off the NHS budget. They're gonna be hit with that cost. So I think we have to be very careful. And of course we are seeing a lot of people using them ill-advisedly. There's obviously the whole black market. There are a lot of problems happening. People, and then there's some nasty side effects as well.